Um, First, I would like, of course, to thank Portraits Books for hosting this event. We're very, very glad to be here. And we're here to celebrate the launch of this book, Over to You. And before we start our reading, the reading Ariane and I prepared, I just want to give you a few informations. And first about the story, the origin of this book. With my father, we exchanged over so many years about the practice of painting, about my painting, about art in general, and the questions concerning life to do with art and artist. And so I think this exchange started long before the letters were written. But then, towards the end of my father's life, for the last years, he lived in Paris, whereas I stayed here in our village in the mountains. And so we continued our conversations, but in the form of letters. In fact, it even started with postcards. We even named it this exchange our postcard chat. But quite quickly, we understood that there was something maybe interesting to share with those writings, and the idea of a book came. And then we continued with knowing that it could become a book. And the exchange lasted over 2 years, 2015 and 16. At the time, my father wasn't writing anymore. After my mother passed away, he didn't write any more books, just a few articles and letters. But the activity he kept doing the most was drawing. That brought him a lot of joy and was really a meaningful time for him. And the joy he had drawing was the same kind of joy we had together with this exchange of letters. And so once it was all combined and formed into what could be a book, the first edition was the French one. Here it is, published by a French publisher called L'Atelier Contemporain. And this established the model for all editions. And so then after this one, it was taken in different countries like Turkey, Spain, Korea, China, and now coming to the States through Pantheon. So that's about the book. Now, just a few things about this lecture we have prepared together with my friend Ariane, who, it has been said, but I say it again, is an extremely talented young artist living in Germany. And I'm really glad and thankful to her to have accepted to do this reading with me. And so first we started to select the letters we wanted to share, and then we rehearsed the reading. But what we mostly did to prepare this moment is to draw portraits of each other, like this, through the screen, using Zoom, because we don't live in the same place. And I was a bit skeptical to begin with, but Ariane believed in it, and indeed it was really drawing portraits. And you will see we use quite a few images during the lecture, including some of those drawings. The lecture is divided in two sequences, two parts, taken from two different chapters of the book. And our drawings come in between those two sections as a kind of little breathing, little pose. And they also come right at the end of the reading. So I think that's all you need to know. And I think we can start. A proposal. Let's take a walk along a border. The border I'm thinking about is hard to name or even to locate. Maybe it's not even a border, but never mind. I will try to take you there. As I'm writing at the table in this cafe, I'm listening to music. With my headphones on, I can concentrate better. The music helps me to cut off, to withdraw from this place and all its distractions. The music I'm listening to reminds me of Sufi music, like the singing of Nusrat Fat Ali Khan, a kind of trance, a trip. Well, this trip would take us to the border we're aiming for. Are the stars visible these days in the night sky of Paris? If so, look up at them tonight and start thinking, as we all know, but in a very abstract way, that they are mostly suns in other solar systems. But also keep in mind where you are on this particular planet, in this particular solar system. Now, wonder about the scale of your life within the scale of life in general. Need a chair? Always better to lie down when looking at stars. Now you may getting near the place I would like us to approach. Let's take another vehicle. Both of us have had the experience of drawing in a life class. That's to say with a model, someone posing, nude. At first, before we really start looking, it all seems pretty obvious. We all know what's a human body, male or female. Or do we? The more we look at it and try to draw it, to represent it on the paper, the more we doubt we know what we're looking at. To the point that we forget, must forget, what we thought of as our knowledge in order to face this fascinating mystery, and from there try to learn again. It's true the human body is a very complex thing, and so this could explain why it remains, or rather becomes, so mysterious when you focus on it. But what about an apple, or the way a coat hangs on a chair? For each of those two, Cézanne and Giacometti have spent an endless amount of time and energy trying to grasp what it means to see clearly. And if you were to ask them, they would both say they had failed. I came out of my mother's body. She came out of her mother's body, and so on. We can look at it from all sides, but there's always something too big for us in life. Too big to be able to think it, to see it, to hear it. And so, to be able to carry on from birth to death, we each have to find a way to deal with this too big. And the least we can say is that it's not easy. Maybe especially today, in this world that leaves so little space for recognizing this weakness of ours. So much exceeds our understanding. So much remains open in what seems or even is closed. This gap between our consciousness and our feelings, between the visible and the invisible, between the said and the unsaid, leads to a kind of vertigo. A vertigo that's not far from praying or from madness. That's the zone where I would like us to meet. Are you coming? With love, Yves.
So here I am with you in the zone that faces the too big. And I've brought with me two images because they have been on my table for months, and I was glancing at them most days, and because they refer in their own way to what you're saying. The first is a photo of a plant by Jitka Hanslova, the Czech photographer of forests and horses. This image of a plant, when seeding, is as mysterious and as vast and as humbling as the sight of the stars in a night sky, don't you think? So, physical scale has little to do with the intimidating bigness. What is intimidating is perhaps the endurance involved. The second is a painting we both know so well by Caravaggio. I send it because it depicts exactly that moment of vertigo or prayer that you refer to. Saint Paul, if you like, has just looked at the stars. Yet, what is so striking is the way in which Caravaggio has painted what surrounds Paul: a horse, a man, a cloak. These banal, everyday presences are painted with such wonder and intensity that they seem not ordinary, but extraordinary. The horse's lifted foreleg and the man's standing leg are oceanic in their depth and their force. They are painted like a tempest might be painted. But after saying all this, here we still are in the zone that faces the too big. When we face the too big, are we not really facing the too brief? That is to say, ourselves, our minds, which have invented the measures, like light years for measuring the bigness? You say this too, but what I'm hinting at is that the bignesses are our invention, are part of our being. Then, if we follow Spinoza and suppose that everything that exists is indivisible because this everything constitutes a whole, we see the bigness as something surrounding us, including us, rather than confronting us. And this is the mystery that art strives to present to us. The figures that you are painting are messengers of this by their very presence, and their gestures show us or remind us of something we half know. We acknowledge and recognize the immense whole with our actions, gestures of solidarity and sharing. Such actions embody hope, which is as big, not by what it promises, but by its very nature, as the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. You still on the border? With all my love, Jay.
Me still on the border. But now where I stand, there is a bridge. So I lean over and take a look down below. My God, what a gap. It's true, I can believe that everything is part of an immense whole, gap, bridge, and me included. Just as I can say, all that happens had to happen. And if I were as wise as the gap is deep, I would stick to that celestial point of view and its eternity. It's a goal worth working for, as it is not a given. But my feelings often bring me down. And then the depth appears to be vertiginous, the parts all separated, the heart beating faster with excitement and fear. It's not a question of truth or reality, but rather a question of how we make an arrangement with ourselves in order to live. or more precisely, in order to stay alive. Recently, I saw the film Le Grand Bleu. I had seen it long ago, and something about it always stayed with me. Not that it's a great film, but in its way, it's about this zone we're talking about. The two main characters are free divers who push the limits of their bodies by going down as deep as possible in the sea, using only their capacity for apnea. The longer they stay underwater, the deeper they go, the more dangerous it becomes. They are reaching and playing with a limit. At some point, one says, the hardest thing when you're down there is to turn around. You need a good reason to come back. And finally, the attraction of this limitless and dark world, 100 meters below the surface, is so strong they offer themselves to it. I think I like to recall that film because I feel something quite similar when painting in the studio. And when you bring up Caravaggio's painting, you yourself talk about an oceanic depth. The plant Yitka took a photo of, which you sent me, is called in French un amour en cage. Both the image and the name set us wondering, asking, how? How can it be? Names sometimes do this. They double the mystery of what they are naming with their own mystery. So, if you look outside, you will see the witch hazel is in flower next to the waking up strawberry plant and the still asleep walnut tree. Walnut literally meaning foreign nut. And equally, you won't miss the noisy magpies. Pie being the old French word for those birds, and mag apparently a slang word meaning chattering. So now, after this dive in the sea and this walk in the garden, I leave you in the hands of a friend who's taking you to a party, a very special party, located, guess where? Love, Yves.
Dearest Eve, like you say, the question is of staying fully alive. Francisco took my arm and led me to the burial of the sardine. It's so pulsing with energy, that painting. We don't talk because he's stone deaf and was when he painted it. Frankly, I don't think the subject of the popular celebration of the sardine on the last day of Carnival before the first day of Lent is very important here. For Goya, it was another scene of human craziness. As I went on looking at it, I was overwhelmed by the din, by the noise, the incomprehensible noise the huge crowd is making. And I imagine that when you are stone deaf, there may be situations whose utter incomprehensibility is like a deafening noise. For those who are at the burial of the sardine, it's perhaps like a wild rock concert. For us spectators, it's a senseless, continuous roar. As Goya said, the sleep of reason produces monsters. My God, look at what's happening in Israel and in Palestine. Every pomegranate is bleeding. I too remember the film Le Grand Bleu, and if I'm not wrong, what partly tempts the two divers to stay there in the depths and not come up to the surface is the silence. And so we have din and silence. Din obliterates explanations, and silence offers a continuous questioning present. Neither can help us much to be fully alive. What can? Maybe asking questions. And questions are not only verbal. When you're painting, you're asking questions, one after another. The paradox about asking questions lies in the fact that the questioner believes that it may be possible to find an answer. And this is a kind of faith. A kind of faith that is totally absent in most church pictures, but which is there, for example, in Morandi's jugs and bricks, no? Yes, it's true that names sometimes double or amplify the meaning of what they're defining. Sunrise, midday, dusk, nightfall, the small hours, tomorrow. With love, John.
Papa, I'm glad Francisco took you by the arm. It's true, you've known each other for a long time. When you and Nella wrote Goya's last portrait, you spent many days and many nights side by side. I guess he hasn't changed since, as he is dead. But you've become an older man. Did you tell him about your difficulties hearing and how your relationship with sound has changed? I've always heard you address the old masters, or writers, or thinkers, those you admire and feel gratitude towards, as if they were comrades, standing right there by our sides. Their physical absence, most of them are long dead, doesn't make the slightest difference. What has been lost is insignificant compared with their ongoing presence. A presence established not only by the works they left, but also by the intensity of their impulse towards what they thought. The number of ramifications between different lives is incalculable, just as the shapes in which life exists are unpredictable. So it could be a game between us of going to a rock concert with Goya, or of knocking at a door in the Via Fondaza in Bologna and waiting for Signor Morandi to open it. A game, a form of make-believe, but nevertheless not gratuitous. For kids, games are more real than most of the so-called reality. But let's go back for a moment to the burial of the sardine. I agree Goya saw it as another scene of human craziness. But it's different from many others he depicted. Battles, fusillades, misery, hunger, illness, the domination and narcissism of the powerful, the absurd rules that hold the world together. All this cruelty of the human condition affected Goya deeply. So deeply, he was considered insane.
Lucidity is dangerous, Francisco.
More than I can say. But here at the burial, it's a carnival. People are playing, joking with and about human craziness. They take the Mickey out of their world. For a moment, they join Goya, for they recognize and witness the same thing. But when they decide to laugh together, he turns around and starts crying.
Some of your paintings, Francisco, are made out of tears.
They didn't stop. I prayed in despair, but they didn't stop. To keep faith no matter what, to ask questions hoping we may understand, to learn to ask new questions in the silence or the din. Do we have another choice? Is there another way towards freedom beside this narrow path? I've lived here almost all my life, since father died anyway. My brother Giuseppe never saw this place. Later, Anna, Dina, Maria, and I found a way to arrange our lives in here, protected from the terrible sunlight, through din, and preserved from the obscurity that swallows everything in the unknown, the silence. Have a seat. This is my refuge. Aren't we lucky to be welcomed in this way by Senor Morandi? In his small world, one finds all the space one will ever need. And I wonder if what makes it so hospitable isn't precisely the face with which Morandi painted his jugs and bricks. As if his hope can be found by listening to the conversation of things. As if we can remain in the company of things, remain in the company of a group of objects, even when they return to their solitude. In other words, as if a part of us keeps living in the place we have left.
Signor Morandi, you are the sole brother of Fra Angelico.
I've always dreamt of spending a night in one of his cells, even though I dislike leaving my home. In our library in Quincy, our childhood bedroom, I hung 4 still lives by Sven side by side. You see those small paintings on paper he did with oil sticks quite late in his life. I love them more and more. Maybe because their fragility never fails. Never fails to what? Tell me about your friend, Sven Blomberg. What was his example and his face? With love, Yves.
Dearest Eve, oddly enough, I didn't tell Goya that, as an old man, I have become hard of hearing. Maybe I'm wrong, but I have the impression that he entitled one of his capriccios, "The Deaf Talking to the Deaf." In your old bedroom, there's a book of all his capriccios. And I also have the impression that you looked at this book when you were still very young. What you say about our artist predecessors seems to me right and important. That is, that their impulse is even more encouraging than their works. And what their impulse signifies is their devotion to posing questions and to searching for partial replies. Yes, the carnival crowd is taking the Mickey and putting their arms around Francisco and sharing his laughter. And after a moment, tears come to his eyes. It's intriguing that both laughter and loss provoke tears. I shut my pen and laid it on the sheet of paper. And when I looked next, it had done this. Curious. And my fingers are stained with Scheffer black. Somebody pointed out to me the other day that Schäfer in German means shepherd. That is Berger, Berger. In the photo you sent of Morandi, he is, as you say, listening as much as looking. Listening to the conversation between objects, between two jars, between satellites and the earth, between a pen and a clean sheet of paper. Philosophers search for answers. Artists seek and confront doubt. Scientists establish formula. Artists find metaphors. You ask me about Sven. What was his example and his faith, you ask? In his way of life, he was unique, and I've never met another painter quite like him. Perhaps he had a little in common with Giacometti, whom he admired and whom he had known when he first came to France in the 1940s. He did not paint to produce paintings. His studio was an upper room in the outhouse of a tiny farm and was scarcely larger than a garden shed. He never invited anybody to climb up into it. His finished paintings he took off from the stretchers and stacked in a vegetable loft for onions. His chosen way of life served his mystical love of nature, although in appearance he didn't look like a mystic, but like an onion seller. His mystical love had something parental about it, as if nature were the mother of everything, and at the same time a child who needed protection. And both roles implied a constant conversation. When he was painting, he was tending the land in another way. He had no ambitions about exhibiting or selling his work. If a friend wanted to buy a painting, he had a good many friends from Paris who came to visit him in Lacoste, and they mostly belonged to philosophical milieu around Garodi and Merleau-Ponty. He would put a high price on it, but indicate that he was making a sacrifice because the painting would no longer be there. Otherwise, he, Romain, and their daughter Karine contrived to live without money. For transport, he had a bicycle. Later, I got him a second-hand deux chevaux. For him, the act of painting was the act of kissing nature. But as happens in kissing, perhaps nature was kissing him, her tongue thrusting toward his throat. He loved birds. They were like postmen. The real postman refused to drive down the 1-kilometer lane to his house, like yours to Verlemont, and he arranged a wooden box where the lane joined the tarred road. His one luxury was his library. He was very well read, and the library was the largest room. Poetry and philosophy. Both he and Romain would read while eating a meal, more often than not prepared by Sven. Over to you. With all my love, Jay. Let's begin again with a painting by Zurbaran of Saint Veronica's Veil. In fact, he painted two. One in which the head of Christ on the pinned up veil is sharp and clear, and another in which his head is like a whisper of an imprint. The painting was in the museum in Valladolid in northwest Spain. The experts reckon that this one is the second, later version that Zurbaran made. You can hardly see the features of the face, only the outline of Christ's hair, his ear, and his beard. And I start wondering and asking myself about the relationship between the touch, the sense of touch, and the art of painting. In the Chauvet cave, beside the painted animals, there are the imprints of hands covered with the same paint. Paintings speak to our eyes, but they also speak to our hands and stimulate our sense of touch, don't they? A great deal of what we see and are watching in life is untouchable, and the gift of the art of painting is to render such untouchable things touchable to the imagination of a spectator looking at a painting. When we're drawing something that is in front of us, our drawing hand often instructs our eye, and our eyes follow the order received. John.
The woman who handed the veil she had over her head to Christ to wipe his face with was called Berenice, according to Nicodemus' apocryphal gospel. The name Veronica came only after, because of the nature of what the tissue revealed, the true image, the Veron icon. You once gave me a frame, a wooden frame without glass, in which you had pinned a black and white reproduction of the Zurbaran we're talking about. Against the wooden background, below the veil, you glued a little Arabic mirror in the form of an arch. And below that, a wooden Spanish fan open. With those came a small booklet of a bird in motion. When you flip its pages, the bird's wings flap up and down. Remember? Today, as I was looking through the Zurbaran monograph we have in the hope of finding the Valladolid version of the veil, I found there was a missing page, the one you had torn out to give me. The relationship between the sense of touch and the art of painting, you ask? I smile, and I feel I could shiver. Shiver because for me it's such a central question. A question that underlies all the others I have as a painter. So deeply, I could say painting is touch made visible. The brush, as any tool, is an extension of the arm and hand. So it has no nerves running inside it. When we are used to handling it, we feel what's happening between its hairs and the canvas with an extreme precision. So when it's a question of choosing which brush to use, it all depends on how you want to touch the canvas, with what kind of stroke. Hands paint, eyes correct. Hands can submit to eyes' decisions. Nevertheless, hands are free. They are free because the art of painting depends on their freedom. Shitao, whom we referred to before, says the origin of painting and calligraphy is celestial, whereas its achievement is human. Maybe celestial has to do with a sense of sight and human with a sense of touch. I close my eyes and think of your back. I see it clearly, and no other back is like it, as vast and round as a planet. But it's my hands that make the image clear. My hands which often massaged your back. If I think of someone's back I have only seen and not touched, I can't see it clearly. It's like any other. You're right. So much of what we see is untouchable. Much more than one first thinks. He sees her with love as he touches her with love. Nobody else sees her that way, as nobody else touches her that way. For decades, Pierre Bonnard painted his wife, Marthe, over and over. So now, looking at his paintings of her, we are given a chance to see her through his touch. She is in reach of our imagination. And we feel for the fragility of her skin in the water of the bathtub. We are touched by it in return. This afternoon in the studio, when I am not painting, my eyes will take me to the wooden frame to touch the veil again. Love, Yves.
The studio filled with a sense of touch, fleeting hands dipped in different colors. When I first went to art school in 1943, the first thing I had to learn was the name of all the pigments and whether they were derived from plants or from minerals. Those that come from minerals intrigued me. Minerals had their origin in the creation of the universe. The Big Bang Theory had not yet been formulated. Minerals were there before life began. Their colors were there before any eye had evolved. Cobalt blue. Cobalt comes from the mineral silver. During our first year at art school, we were forbidden to use ready-made tubes of paint. We had to go to Color Merchant, buy the chosen powder, and mix it ourselves with oils and turpentine and egg yolk. Fingering the cobalt powder, I had the impression of fingering a prophecy that had waited millions of years to be fulfilled. And now I could apply it with a brush. Love, John.
Here is a photo I have as a background on the desktop of my laptop. I took it a few winters ago when grinding the color I use the most, white. I don't grind all my colors, but I do like to have my own pot of titanium white. I use a rather cheap ready-made white oil paint as a base, to which I add a lot of titanium pigments and just enough linseed oil to be able to grind the whole thing together. With my two hands on the glass Müller, I turn it around and around in the shape of an 8, or the sign for infinity, until I reach the texture I want. A fresh, honey-like texture between solid and liquid. As my hands repeat the gesture on the marble table, my eyes can gaze out the window. On the windowsill, I see the jars of linseed oil that have been waiting there for years. The more daylight it takes in, the more secretive and better it becomes. Inside the jars, beneath the wrinkled skin that has formed on the surface, the oil is the color of gold, a liquid transparent gold, again like honey when it comes out of the honeycombs. When I raise my eyes slightly from the jars and look beyond, I see the 3 beehives at the bottom of the garden. Whether it's a warm day or way below zero, in the center of those little houses, down in the heart of the swarms, the liver of the bees, like that of a human body, depends on that. After a while, grinding is like a dance. The movement of the hands and arms spread to the whole body. You get warm. Stop from time to time for a break. Or to gather in one place all the oily stuff that is spreading out all over the marble table. In front of the spatula you use to push the paint around, the mixture rolls like waves on the surface of the sea. Usually there's snow outside when I make my pot of Blanc de Titane. Fingering the white oil paint whilst looking out at the landscape wrapped up in its white blanket is joyful. Maybe because it simply makes me feel part of nature. I grind as it snows. But if we compare the two colors, my white is heavy and yellowish, more like piss than honey this time. Outside, the white of the snow is so pure, you think angel dust. With love, Yves.
I see your photo of the homemade titanium white. Ever since I first learned the names of the pigments, titanium white has appealed to me. Zinc white was for mechanics, flake white was for decorators, but titanium white suggested Parnassus, where the gods hang out. So no wonder you make the figure 8 with your palette knife. For me, the equivalent of your photo is something I'd name dictionary. Yet it isn't a dictionary at all. It's the same as what you talk about later. It has the form of a beehive, and all the bees in it are syllables of words protecting the queen bee that lays the eggs of language. It's not a compendium of words like a normal dictionary. It's a maternity ward of words. This may seem strange, for a language is, after all, an established achievement, an historical edifice. But for a writer, the language he writes in, if he's a good writer, is always unfinished, tentative, expectant. There are many references to honey in what you write. And I fancy that for us both, the house in Quincy and its identity were intimately associated, linked with beekeeping and the collecting of honey. The secret of the house was and is to be found in its honeycombs. Love, Jay.
Honeycombs. Repeat that word and harvest gold. Gold made liquid, gold made light. Repeat that word and return pure into paradise, into the womb. I often try to have gold in my paintings. Not real gold, but a substitute pigment named iriodine. Once applied, it shines depending on the light and the angle from which you look at it. I often try, but it rarely works out. Indeed, it tends to remain artificial. And in that sense, gold is like ideas in painting. It works better when you accept giving them up. Colors reveal themselves in the daylight. But what about in the darkness of an inside? Can we imagine the color of honeycombs inside the closed beehive? Or the color of the muscles, organs, and blood inside a living body? Maybe all colors are multiple, and their palette extends far beyond our visual capacities. Nevertheless, a painter must find a way through each and all of them. After more than 20 years of painting, the difficulty I'm facing is different than before. It's no longer a question of arriving at a painting that holds together, that works as a composition or an image. I know after some effort how to get to that. No, the problem now is which image is worth keeping. Most of the time, I must admit, they don't deserve to remain visible. And so I work them over, again and again, image upon image, a kind of endless process of recovering. But always driven by the hope that this one will be the good one. Eventually, often when despair takes over hope, when my will surrenders in face of the reality of what's there before me, when all ambitions are crushed and one is left like an idiot, when all the conditions meet, which is so rare, then a painting worth keeping comes to life. Something magical that one can't really explain. I may need time to see what's there, time for my eyes to be freed from all they have seen and looked for on that specific canvas. I may need other eyes to confirm what is really there, like your eyes always did. Love, Yves.